Hi, this is Liz, friendly neighborhood reference librarian and cinephile, and these are my movie picks. It's August, and with few exceptions, it's a movie dead zone. The blockbuster releases of June and July, and now May and April, have passed, and it's the dumping ground for studios to slough off potential bombs. Other than January, this is considered the place where movies go to die. But, as with all things in life, there are exceptions. Good movies have been released in August. Just last year, we had a box office hit with Crazy Rich Asians and an Oscar nominee with BlacKkKlansman, both genuinely good movies in addition to being successful. Plus, August has given us surprise hits like Superbad, Straight Outta Compton, Julie and Julia, and The Sixth Sense. Disney even lucked out when they released Guardians of the Galaxy in August of 2014. Still, it's an overall dumpster, which is why I'm calling this Treasures of the August Trash Fire. First off, we're going to head to the 80s. I'd like to take a moment to shout out the great podcast 80s All Over for not only giving me a more well-rounded view of cinema of the 1980s, but encouraging me to check out and revisit older movies, like this one, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, released in 1984. I saw this back when I was in my late teens, and I definitely didn't get it. Thanks to 80s All Over, I gave it another try, and guess what? After years of watching weird and obscure stuff, I get Buckaroo Banzai. It's referencing stuff that's kind of niche, so it's not hard to imagine that it has only a cult following rather than mainstream recognition. Sure, it's absurd. The title character, played by Peter Weller, is a physicist, neurologist, test pilot, and rock musician who has to save the world from aliens. But, it's based on pulp sci-fi adventure stories, and it's meant to be that way. It's a great entry of self-aware and sincere homage. And on a great side note, W.D. Richer, the man who directed this, was the guy who helped adapt the '78 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So he knows good sci-fi. Staying in the 80s, we're going back to high school. Oh no. Oh, just Fast Times at Ridgemont High, that is. Released in 1982, this movie was a launchpad for many careers. Sean Penn, Phoebe Cates, one of America's most underrated actresses, Jennifer Jason Leigh, and Judge Reinhold. It's a humanizing look at the lives of a few students at the aforementioned Ridgemont High, and the choices and mistakes that they can make. However, it's never judgmental of any of the characters. They're never the joke, and you are never made to feel like you're better than them. If anything, you'll see yourself in Stacy, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, or Mark, played by Brian Backer. This is likely because the movie was written by Cameron Crowe and directed by Amy Heckerling, two people who have the audacious idea that teenagers are people and that you should have empathy for these characters. It handles real-life issues with a good non-after-school special type of way. And it still holds up after all these years. Up next is another favorite, and I must say, one of the best action movies ever made. Ever. We're talking Hard Target. This movie has everything. Lance Henriksen is a villain. Jean-Claude Van Damme is a hero trying to pass for a born and bred Bayou boy, which he does not. Wilford freaking Brimley, and to top it all off, directed by John Woo, who is one of the best action directors of all time. I mean, you should just be trying to look this up now as I speak. In case you're not sold on this, it's Lance Henriksen and Arnold Vosloo. They run a company where the hit rich hunt the homeless for sport, and JCVD takes them on as a one-man army. Wilford Brimley rides away from an explosion on a horse. I mean, if you aren't interested, I don't know what to tell you. Speaking of being sold on a plot, we're talking about Inglourious Bastards. This was released August 22nd, 2009, and I remember seeing it opening weekend in a packed theater. Pretty much everyone was there because of two things. Quentin Tarantino, and this is kind of before we knew he was a bit of a reckless jerk, and the idea of Brad Pitt hunting Nazis. Thing is, this movie is actually Melanie Laurent and Christoph Waltz's film. Everyone went in thinking it was just going to be a raucous fun time, and it is at times, but we actually get a lot of tense, dialogue-filled scenes. It's Tarantino at his best and his most restrained, and it pays off. It's, in my opinion, his last great film. It's also his last film edited by Sally Menke, who passed away in 2010. She had edited all of his previous movies, and Tarantino credited her with how his movies turned out. So, let no one tell you that editing isn't important. Also, kind of while we're at this, let no one tell you that animation isn't an art form. I'm talking about Kubo and the Two Strings. Released in 2016, this was made by Laika, probably the best and most underappreciated animation studio in the United States. While everyone else is working with computers, Laika does stop-motion animation, and it always looks unique and wonderful. The movie takes place in feudal Japan and is about a boy named Kubo. He fights witches and other demons while receiving guidance from a snow monkey and a samurai beetle. I know, it sounds silly, but it's actually a very moving and beautiful film about memory, family, and love. Unfortunately, this was practically ignored when it came out. And yet, y'all saw Storks a month later. Check it out, and please, parents, take your kids to better movies. Speaking of Laika Studios, this next movie is one that I would consider robbed of money, its place in culture, and the 2012 Best Animated Feature Oscar, Paranorman. Paranorman is probably one of my favorite American animated movies of the new millennium. It's about a young man named Norman, lives in a Massachusetts town with a history of witch persecution. Wonder what town that is. Oh, and he can talk to the dead. And now he needs to stave off a curse. It's a movie that's not afraid to be scary, and it's not afraid to be sad. Norman is ostracized for his gift and written off as a crazy kid, even by his father. The movie also isn't afraid to get dark either, which, not to spoil too much, but you will get what I mean when you get to the big reveal about the town's history. And in a time where a lot of people are fearing those who are different, a movie like Paranorman, where what is different is what makes you strong, is a refreshing and needed movie for people of all ages. Still can't believe freaking Brave won over this. Kind of sticking with horror, we're going on to Signs. Yes, the M. Night Shyamalan alien movie. Fun fact, I actually saw this opening night, August 2nd, 2002, back when movies actually opened on Fridays. And look, the movie has its flaws. You know, one word, water. Oh, and Mel Gibson's later actions kind of taint this too. But I still think it overall holds up as an alien invasion story and has some great scares and creepy moments. The movie works best when the threat is hidden. You see something move in the cornfield, a shadow by the window, a creak at the door. And that's a majority of the movie. For all of his misses, Shyamalan does know how to make you feel uneasy, and it really works here. We know movie-wise that it was all downhill from here for a while, but I will still go to bat for this movie, and not the way Joaquin Phoenix takes the bat to the alien. We're jumping from horror to comedy with Talladega Nights. This was originally released in 2006, and I really didn't discover it until it made the TV circus. Will Ferrell is hit or miss for me, but John C. Reilly is gift. And I am not really an Oscar fan, so I really did not think to see it. I'm glad I finally gave this a look because I think this movie is a riot. It's a great spoof of sports movie tropes, and even if you aren't a big Will Ferrell fan, it's not really the Will Ferrell show. John C. Reilly is great, as he always is. Sacha Baron Cohen is great. Leslie Bibb is great, if kind of underused. But for me, the dearly departed Michael Clarke Duncan gets the biggest laughs out of me. This is also one of the few movies that everyone in my family likes, which, considering our varied taste, is a small miracle. Sticking with comedy, we are moving on to Tropic Thunder. So, you know how people say, oh, we couldn't make Blazing Saddles today. Well, one, Blazing Saddles wouldn't make sense today as it was about films and filmmaking from the 60s and 70s. And two, more importantly, we did make the equivalent back in 2008. Ben Stiller's satire on Hollywood and movie making is violent, offensive, and one of the funniest movies of the past 20 years. It's centered on the troubled production of the Vietnam War film, Tropic Thunder, and the various actors who are trying to star in it. Stiller uses the setting to lampoon everything from producers, real-life troubled film productions, comedy stars going dramatic, and Hollywood's habit of whitewashing roles. Robert Downey Jr. stars as a Daniel Day-Lewis-style actor who dyes his skin black to play the role of Black Sergeant. Something that an actual black cast member points out wouldn't be needed had they just cast a black person. Oddly enough, that thing is not what got the movie in trouble when it came out. It was the film within a film, Simple Jack, in which Ben Stiller's character plays a mentally challenged man to go dramatic. Once it was clear that the movie was not making fun of the disabled, but actors playing mentally disabled people is an easy chance at an Oscar, the fear kind of died down a bit. But I have to say, when I first saw RDJ in blackface, I was really not expecting that to be the less controversial thing of this movie. Some of the movie can be a little esoteric. I mean, if you do not know a lot of film history and you do not know a lot about Hollywood bombs, you might not get some of the jokes. But it is still a great comedy that shows, yes, you can still make offensive movies. But what makes them funny is taking on the status quo and not punching down. Our final film is one that came out on the heels of two beloved genre comedies and kind of threw fans a curveball. It's The World's End. Director Edgar Wright and stars/writers Nick Frost and Simon Pegg became famous in the U.S. for Shaun of the Dead, a zombie dramedy satire in which Frost and Pegg played, well, let's just call them man-children. And in Hot Fuzz, the characters weren't as immature but still got to be youthful and reckless. And in both movies, Pegg's character was the more mature than Frost. In The World's End, the tables are turned, making Pegg the more irresponsible man-child and Frost a responsible adult who, along with three other old friends, has to deal with Pegg, who's never really matured past 19. I think the idea of showing how exhausting and depressing it would be for both friends and the individual themselves to be stuck in the past made people a little uncomfortable, and the film doesn't have the following and widespread appeal that Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz have. But it's still a great movie. It's got a nice body snatcher sci-fi vibe that comments on corporate branding, towns losing their individuality, and small businesses losing to conglomerates, and I am here for that. And plus, it's still wicked funny. It also gets very emotionally raw. Wright, Pegg, and Frost have always been able to balance humor and heavier emotions, but it really works here. The final climax isn't just a big explosion. That does happen. It's a fight between Pegg and Frost's characters, uncovering old wounds and personal disappointments, and it manages to hit as hard as any drama. Anyone who says these two can't act should watch this movie. It may not be as light of a comedy as Shaun of the Dead, but it's a wonderful example of filmmakers maturing. Oh, and there are robots. You can always come for the robots. Well, I hope I've managed to convince you that August isn't a complete dead zone for movies. If anything, it's actually changing as many studios are pushing back their larger releases so they don't have to compete with Disney releases. Though, since Disney owns almost everything now, even that might get a little hard. On that note, I'll be back next month. Until then, you can find me at the Derry Public Library's information desk. See you next time, and thank you to DerryCAM, Derry Community Access Media, empowering independent voices.